Hey, what's up guys? Jake with Legacy 4x4 here again, and today we're going to be doing part 2 of my do-it-yourself teardrop trailer build. Now in this part we're going to be focusing on axle placement and finishing up the frame of the trailer. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, to catch you guys up, in the last video we built this entire trailer frame. We built the whole thing out of 2x2 by 1/8 inch steel tubing, and you can see behind me that it's a very simple trailer frame. Nothing too complicated about it whatsoever. Now, to finish up the trailer frame, all we gotta do is smooth out some stuff, add a couple of extra gussets, etc. But we need to get the axle mounted first. That's gonna be the priority of this video. So, to do this, you're gonna need an axle, springs, hangers, and associated hardware for those axle kits. Let me show you guys what we got for this trailer. For my purposes, I went with one of the standard square axle tubes that you can get at Northern Tool, Tractor Supply, etc. A bunch of different hardware stores across the country. Now, it's a 2,000 pound trailer axle tube. It is basically just a tube. It's a 1 inch or 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch square tube with spindles welded on the ends of it. To go with them, you also need hubs. I got some 5 by 4.5 inch hubs because that's a standard tire size or rim size for trailers, and I already ordered the rims for it, so I went with that hub size. Now, the reason I went with that square axle and not something else, sure, I could have gone to a torsion axle, I could have gone to a Timbren axle suspension type setup, but frankly, those are all just really expensive. So this axle tube was $100, and then each of these hubs was $50, so $200, and the axle setup, then plus springs, hangers, and that kind of stuff. It worked out to about 300 bucks for the axle setup, which is relatively cheap, honestly. So that's a part of it. This trailer is not going to weigh over 2,000 pounds. I know that for a fact because I'm towing it with a car that can only tow 2,700 pounds. So I'm purposely designing this thing to be under 2,000 pounds for sure. Now, the other reason, and a big one to me, I didn't want a custom axle or a hard to find axle. Now the reason for that is because I wanted something that was replaceable. So God forbid if something were to happen, this axle is easily replaceable or easily repaired depending on where I'm at in the country. So this, I can go to any Northern Tool, any Tractor Supply, anywhere in the country, and I can readily find this axle and I can bolt it back into place if I need to. Same with the hubs, the leaf springs, and the hangers. If you choose to go to a more complicated axle or a custom axle, it just might be harder to find parts for that. Most of them are pretty standard, but I like the simplicity of doing something like this personally. Now, it might get upgraded again in the future, but for now, for the build of this is going to be just fine. For the initial tow across the country, it's going to be just fine. So I didn't go to the Timbrens or any of the axle-less stuff because of cost. Again, I might upgrade in the future if I turn this into more of an off-road camper, but for my purposes, it's going to be on the highway, and then it's going to be in a campground. So it doesn't need, I'm not doing any like rock crawling or anything crazy with this trailer. So I also picked up a front tongue jack as well because Northern Tool had them on sale for 30 bucks. So I picked up one of those, and our spring hanging hardware and our axle bolt kit. So we got everything you need. Now I'm going to lay this out and I'll bring you guys back in. We'll talk about axle placement, which is a big part of this. Okay, so before we actually place the axle, I have to make a couple of axle hangers. So the kit comes with these. These are zinc plated axle hangers. These are perfectly fine for what they are. But to mount onto the trailer, so you can just use those. If you wanted to just take one of these, they conveniently fit perfectly on a 2-inch tube. So you can just weld this straight in there, clean off the zinc first, weld this straight into there, and call it a day. Now, that is a way to do it. I prefer a slightly more durable method. So, yeah, that's fine, but that's relatively thin gauge tube that we're using, combined with the fact that you know, these are the big hangers, there's a smaller one, but like you really only have like an inch and a half of weld area on these sides and about 2.5, 3 inches on the long side. Now there is some discrepancy about where you're supposed to weld. Some people say weld the front end, some people say weld the side end. I don't know, each their own. I'm gonna weld all 4 ends because why not? But I wanna make some extended size mounts for these to go onto the tube of the trailer. So basically, I don't wanna rely only on the tube, and I wanna get more weld weld area, more linear feet of welding to mount these suspension components onto. So to do that, I'm gonna use more of that scrap 3/16 plate we have, and I'm gonna make 4 of these little guys. So I just made 2 of these already. Now I don't have a bender. Matt does, but I don't have it down here. So I gotta do this the other way. It would normally be better to just cut one of these out, bend it, and then weld it into place. I don't have that option, so I did it the old-fashioned way. I cut one of these rectangles out, and then I drew a line where I had to mark it, and I cut with an angle grinder about halfway, 35 to 50% of the way through the steel, not all the way through. That then allows me to put it onto my vise, and using a plier and a breaker bar, I can physically bend this by hand. Now, downside to that, you have to go back through and weld this seam. So by cutting the metal in half or by trimming it down through that center there, it makes it weak enough that you're able to bend it by hand so that you can make a simple channel shape like this. Now, you just have to go through and do a full weld on this beam. It's fine, it's not a big deal. So, now though, this gives me the option on the tube here. So you can see that this wraps around about 1 inch on each side plus the 2-inch top plate. So now I have 1, 2, and then 1 more, so 4 inches of weld on the ends, and then 6 inches of welds along both sides. And now it's also wrapping the tube, and I've now increased the thickness of where these are mounting. Yes, technically, if you were to do this, you've now made the rest of the trailer a little bit weaker, because wherever this is, north of it, is going to be thinner gauge stuff, and so you could potentially rip through the trailer frame, but I find that to be extremely unlikely. So I like this option to give me a secondary sturdy mount. Totally optional. If you don't want to make these, then you can just sit here and just weld those hangers right on. But I'm going to make the last 2 of these and show you guys how I do it, and then we'll start laying out this axle. Okay, so as you can see, it's as easy as that. It takes just a couple of minutes. I just plasma cut out that using a guide, cut it in half, grinded it, or angle cut it, and then, as you saw, bent it using a breaker bar and a wrench first, and then because of the angle, I can't do the other side like that, so I just used a hammer to get the other side down. So, anyways, with these done, I'm gonna weld up these edges, and we're gonna put them on the trailer here. Okay, so I got those brackets, well, the ones that I made, mounted onto the trailer and fully welded aside from the top side, which I'll do when I flip the trailer back around. But I've got most of it welded enough that it'll hold its weight. Let's talk axle placement. So, the technical, actual, real-world rule of thumb is that you want 15 to 20% of tongue weight on the trailer for optimal towing. Now, in order to do that though, you would have to have the whole trailer built and fully loaded before installing the axles. Now, sure, I could do that. I could finish weld this whole thing, I could flip it upside down, I could build the entire trailer, I could get it weighed and all that kind of stuff, and then I could install the axle. But first off, it's really time consuming, and second off, it's not really feasible for what I'm doing. So I'm gonna build this thing in place, and that's it. So I want to get the axle installed first so that I have access to weld these from the top side like this right now. So if I were to do it the other way, I would have to weld overhead and weld across, which is possible. I've done it on the Jeep, I've done it on other stuff, but I think it's better to do this. I trust my welds better like this. I trust my welds no matter what, but I feel more confident if I'm able to do it like this than if it's upside down, all completely built, and then I figure out where to place the axle. So that's what we're gonna do here. Now, the other rule of thumb, if you don't want to go for the 15-20% tongue weight by math, then the next rule of thumb is 60-40 by length. So you want 60% of the weight to the front and 40% to the rear. So you want the axle placed at that 60-40 split on the rear of this. Now, There's a little bit more math that goes into if you have like a heavy galley, which I'm gonna have. I'm gonna have a 200 amp hour battery and a Yeti cooler in my galley as well as all my gear. So 40% is about right. If you had a lighter galley, you can back it up to like 30, 35% because you wanna have a little bit more tongue weight. But I'm gonna have a pretty heavy galley, so I'm gonna go 60-40. Now, when you do this math, you don't use the trailer tongue in the calculation. It's only for the box portion of the trailer that you do the math for. So in my case, I have an exactly 8-foot long box, and 40% of 8 feet is 38 inches. Well, 38.4 inches. I'm gonna round down, and I'm gonna do the center of my axle at 38 inches on the dot. So I've marked that on the table, I gave it borders, and I squared the axle onto it. I then removed the axle and then lined the springs up with the center point where I want the center of the axle to be, and then I use that to mark where the front spring hangers needs to be. After I get the front spring hangers into place, then I'll use the springs to get the rear spring hangers into place. So the way it looks now, I've got the front hangers clamped into place on there. I triple checked the measurements. I did it both by eye, and then I came through with a measuring tape and kind of like shimmied it just a hair, like a 1/16 of an inch, to get them perfectly even on both sides so that the front axle, or so that the axle is perfectly square with the trailer. Now, you want this to be as close to square as possible, obviously, because this is what's going to tow behind the trailer or behind the car, so you don't want it to be all cattywampus and have a trailer that's going sideways down the highway. Now, there's a little bit of a margin of error though. Bear in mind that it is a suspension system and you're connecting leaf springs by bolts and with the spring hangers. So you do have a little bit of play in this style of system, but for our cases, you want to make this as square as possible. So take your time on this, double and triple check your measurements. So I measured from the back of the trailer and the front of the trailer, made sure that everything is exactly squared and even on both sides. So with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and weld up these front hangers, and then we're gonna get on and put the backs in. Okay, as you guys can see behind me, I have the axle all completely mocked up. I did tighten the bolts, but I didn't torque them yet, but it is there. I squared it. You know, you gotta make sure that the axle, where the spindles are gonna go, are equidistance away from the frame of the axle, so that you don't have tires sticking out on the wrong sides, too much on one side or the other. So, got that all squared. I bolted in, same thing, I didn't torque yet, but bolted in the leaf spring hangers, and got that all done. Let me take you guys off the tripod and I'll show you guys around what this looks like. So I haven't welded these sides yet. I'm still deciding if I'm going to or not, but I did weld the fronts of them, which is what I found on a Engineering Explained website, how people recommended to do it. Obviously then using the buffer plate here as well was a recommendation from that website. You can see that this is what the hanger looks like. So these are going to get painted. I'm going to take the axle and the springs off when I paint, but these are going to get all painted. And then you can see what they look like back here. Same thing. I could have shimmied this up a little bit more. I did not account for the hangers being a little bit backwards when I did it, but this is how it worked out and it'll be okay. It's still got plenty of space. It's close enough to center. And then you can see this is what this axle tube looks like. I bought the little square U-bolt hangers. It comes with the plate, the hangers, or U-bolts, and the nuts for the bottom of it here. Now, these are no weld, so they're meant to be fully adjustable, so you just kind of slide them around. This is a different piece that comes with the axle kit. I'm probably going to do a couple tack welds on the edge here just to hold it into place, but I'm not going to fully weld that. I'm just going to do a couple tacks on it just to keep it from moving around, but that's what that looks like. It's identical on the other side. So now, next up, I got to make these 8-inch plates for back here. So I'm doing 4 8-inch corner plates on the 4 main corners. It's going to work as a gusset to these back corners here where this main tube is tied in. So it's going to work as a gusset for back here, as well as give me a place to bolt in some stabilizer jacks. So I'm going to get some 4 little scissor stabilizer style jacks, and I'm going to be able to bolt them into that 8-inch plate back here. So I'm going to cut out some 8-inch plates and then weld those into the 4 corners next. All right, so we're all finished up for the day. Let me walk you guys around it and then we'll close out this video. All right, so starting from up front here, you can see we added in these little 8-inch by 8-inch plates. I also went through and added in these 1.5 by 6-inch plates down the whole middle to tighten up the center of the trailer and to give it just one more little gusset. Is this level of gussetry necessary? No, truthfully, probably not, but I did it, so I think I can see back here we added in the hangers, and we've got the axle all mounted up. Got matching plates in the rear here, and the matching gussets going the whole way down the center of the trailer. I didn't do those two on the side because I thought that would be overkill. I've got the front plates, so it's good enough for me. But that's what it looks like. Right. With all of the underside frame welded, the top all welded, now we are done with the basic frame of this trailer. So it took 2 full days to do this. Material cost on this with all the axle parts and everything else about $400. So that is what it is. And it took me about 5 hours to do all of this welding and to line the axle up and everything on the trailer. But we are complete. So in the next video, we're going to flip this thing over, get it on its belly, and then we're gonna go through and start building the upper frame. That's gonna be the next thing that we are knocking out. So we're gonna be using 1x1 to build a simple square, well, the teardrop shape, and then we're gonna be lining that with the plywood that's gonna make the frame, the outside shell of this camper. So the next video is gonna be building the base camper frame, and then after that, we're gonna continue on this build. If you guys like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. This build series is progressing kind of quickly. I've got a month to do this project, so we're gonna see how far I can get this thing in about a month. So I'll catch you guys in the next one.